The words I heard that afternoon weren't meant for me. I know that. She didn't know I was standing just around the corner of the hallway, still in my coat, still holding the casserole dish I'd driven 40 minutes to bring over. I heard every single word. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Lorraine. I'm 67 years old, and for most of those years I considered myself a practical woman. I spent 28 years running a small property management company in Columbus, Ohio. Nothing glamorous, but I built it from scratch after my divorce, when my son was 9 years old and I had $400 in my checking account and a very stubborn belief that I was going to be fine. I was fine. Eventually I was better than fine. I sold the business 6 years ago and retired with enough to live comfortably, travel occasionally, and still have something meaningful to pass on someday. I say all of this not to brag. I say it so you understand that I didn't come from money. I earned every dollar, and I knew what it meant to earn it. My son, Derek, grew up watching me work. He turned out well, kind, steady, responsible. He married a woman named Cheryl about 12 years ago, and they have 2 kids. The older one is my grandson, Tyler, who is now 29. Tyler was always the quiet one. Smart, a little guarded, but sweet in his own way. He called me every few weeks growing up, asked me about my garden, told me about baseball. We had a real relationship, or at least I thought we did. Tyler met his girlfriend, Amanda, about 3 years ago. She seemed lovely at first, sharp, well-dressed, very confident. The kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately figures out the social order. I noticed that about her early on, but I told myself confidence was a good thing. Tyler seemed happier than I'd seen him in years. That was enough for me. They got engaged last spring. Derek called me the same evening Tyler proposed. He was excited, a little emotional. He said Amanda had already started talking about venues. I laughed and said that sounded about right. Then he got a little quieter and said, "Mom, you know they're both still paying off student loans. They don't really have the savings for a big wedding." I asked him what they were thinking in terms of budget. He said Amanda had her heart set on something around $90,000. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "That's not a small wedding, Derek." He agreed. He said they were going to scale back, that Amanda was already disappointed but would understand. He wasn't asking me for anything. I want to be clear about that. My son has never once asked me for money. That's just how he was raised. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. $90,000. I thought about what it would mean to Tyler to have that day be something real, something beautiful. I thought about how I'd been sitting on my savings for years, taking the occasional cruise, repainting my kitchen, and not doing much else with it. I thought about how money sitting in an account doesn't love anyone. So 2 days later, I called Tyler directly. I told him I wanted to help. I told him I'd been thinking about it, and I wanted to contribute toward the wedding, a real contribution, not a gift card. I said I could put in up to $75,000. I said the only thing I asked was that we do it together, that I be part of the planning process, at least in a meaningful way. Not to take over, just to be included. Tyler was so quiet on the phone that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "Grandma, are you serious?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I have to tell Amanda." I said, "Of course, take your time." He called me back within the hour. Amanda wanted to talk to me herself. She got on the phone, and she was warm, so warm. She said she couldn't believe my generosity, that she was overwhelmed, that she'd always hoped Tyler's family would be close. She said she wanted me involved in everything. She called me a blessing. I hung up the phone feeling genuinely happy. That's the part that still stings a little when I think back on it. How happy I was. The first few planning sessions were wonderful. Amanda and I met at a little coffee place near her apartment in Dublin, just outside Columbus. She had a whole binder, color swatches, printed photos of flower arrangements, a spreadsheet of vendors. I was impressed. I like organized people. We talked through venue options, and she mentioned a place called Whitethorn Estate, a restored farmhouse property with a barn and gardens. Beautiful photos online. It could hold up to 200 guests and had a wedding coordinator on staff. It was one of the more expensive options, but I told her if that's what she loved, let's go see it. We went together on a Tuesday morning. It was genuinely stunning. Rolling property, a pond, white fences, an old oak tree they used for ceremonies. Amanda grabbed my arm when we stepped onto the grounds and said, "This is it. This is exactly it." I felt something warm in my chest watching her face. I wrote the deposit check that same afternoon, $22,000. I also started making calls. I had connections from years of working with contractors and vendors. I knew a florist in Westerville who'd done corporate events for some of my old tenants, a catering company I'd used for a retirement party 3 years back. I thought I could help save some money on the margins while still getting quality. I mentioned this to Amanda. She nodded and said that sounded great. A week later, I called the florist to set up a consultation and mentioned Tyler and Amanda's names. There was a pause. The florist, a woman I'd known for 10 years, said, "Oh, they actually already came in with Amanda's mother. They chose everything last Thursday." I said, "I'm sorry?" She said yes, they'd finalized the floral contract. She sounded a little uncomfortable, like she could tell this was news to me. I thanked her and hung up. I called Tyler. He didn't answer. I texted, "Just heard from the florist. Did you and Amanda already go in?" He replied 20 minutes later, "Yes, sorry, Grandma. Amanda's mom had a connection there too, so we just went ahead. It all worked out." I sat with that for a little while. I told myself it was fine. It was just flowers. Maybe Amanda's mother had a better deal. Maybe I was being sensitive. The next month, I let it go. I kept going to the planning meetings when I was invited, which was not every meeting, I noticed. Amanda had a whole group, her mother, her 2 sisters, her best friend who was the maid of honor. They met regularly at Amanda's apartment for what they called wedding planning nights. I was not invited to these. I heard about them afterward in passing when Amanda mentioned decisions that had already been made. The caterer was chosen without me. The photographer was booked without me. The cake tasting happened on a Saturday. I was told about the following Tuesday. Each time I brought it up gently, Amanda had a reasonable explanation. The caterer meeting was a last-minute thing. The photographer had limited availability. The cake place only had one open Saturday slot. Every reason made sense on its own. Together they formed a pattern I kept trying not to see. I mentioned it to my son. Derek got quiet in that way he does when he's uncomfortable. He said Amanda was just enthusiastic, that she wasn't trying to exclude me, that maybe I could talk to Tyler about it directly. I called Tyler. Tyler said his grandmother was the most important woman in his life, and that Amanda loved me. He said it in a way that felt like a rehearsed answer. I kept writing checks. The venue deposit, the catering deposit, the wire transfer to the photographer's business account. Money toward the florist contract that Amanda's mother had taken care of as reimbursement. I kept a spreadsheet. By April, I was at $61,000, with a remaining commitment of about $14,000 for day of coordination, the rehearsal dinner, and final vendor balances. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. I had made a beef and vegetable casserole, Tyler's favorite, something I've made for him since he was 12 years old. I wanted to drop it off, and I wanted to see him because I felt the distance growing, and I didn't know how to name it. I drove to their apartment. The door was unlocked, which wasn't unusual. They kept it that way when they were home. I knocked, called out, no one answered. I stepped inside to leave the dish in the kitchen. That's when I heard them. Tyler and Amanda, in the living room just past the hallway. They didn't know I was there. Amanda was talking. Her voice had that particular edge it got when she was wound up about something. I heard her say, "She keeps acting like she's the mother of the bride. She has opinions about the centerpieces." The centerpieces, Tyler. Tyler said something low I couldn't make out. Amanda said, "I'm just saying, it's our wedding, not her victory lap." Then she laughed, a short, hard sound. Honestly, the sooner she hands over the last of it and steps back, the better. I love Tyler's grandmother, but she needs to understand that writing the check doesn't buy her a seat at every table. There was a pause. Then Amanda said, "Your mother agrees with me, by the way. She said your grandmother has always needed to feel important." I stood very still. I was still holding the casserole dish. The ceramic was warm against my palms. I thought about the Tuesday morning at Whitethorn Estate. Amanda grabbing my arm. This is it. This is exactly it. I thought about the deposit check I wrote that same afternoon. I set the casserole dish down on the kitchen counter. very carefully, without making a sound. I walked back out the front door. I pulled it closed behind me. I sat in my car in the parking lot for about 4 minutes, looking at nothing. Then, I drove home. I did not cry until I was inside with the door locked. And then I cried for a long time. Not the angry kind, just the kind that comes when something you believed in turns out to have been hollowed out. I cried for Tyler, who had sat on the phone with me and said I was the most important woman in his life. I cried for the Tuesday morning with the pond and the white fences. I cried for the version of myself that had called it being part of something. Then I stopped. I made myself a cup of coffee. I opened my laptop. I had paid $61,000. I had $14,000 left to transfer. The venue final balance was due in 3 weeks. The coordination fee and rehearsal dinner deposits were due shortly after. I looked at the spreadsheet. I looked at every line. I thought about what Amanda had said. Writing the check doesn't buy her a seat at every table. I thought about that for a while. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney, a woman named Patricia who I have worked with for 15 years. I told her I wanted to understand what, if any, formal agreements covered my contributions to my grandson's wedding. She confirmed what I already suspected. I had no contract, no written agreement, no formal documentation of any conditions. The money I'd already transferred was gone. But the remaining $14,000? That was entirely mine to keep. I said, "Good. That's what I needed to know." The next morning I called Whitethorn Estate. I explained that there had been a change in the financial arrangements for the Tyler and Amanda booking and that the remaining balance from my account would not be coming. The coordinator was kind. She said the contract was in Tyler and Amanda's names. I had simply been listed as the payment source, so the obligation remained with them. She said she was sorry for the confusion. I said there was no confusion on my end. I wished her a good day. I called the day of coordinator, a woman named Sharon with her own event planning business, who I had personally found and referred to Amanda 2 months ago. I told Sharon that my contribution to the wedding had concluded and that she should follow up directly with the couple regarding any outstanding balance. Sharon paused and then said carefully, "I see. I'll reach out to them." The rehearsal dinner venue, a private room at a steakhouse in Worthington I had reserved and agreed to pay for. I called and canceled my credit card hold. I let them know the reservation would need to be rebooked under a different name if the event was still happening. It took me about 2.5 hours to make all the calls. When I was done, I sat back in my kitchen chair and felt the strangest thing: stillness, not happiness, not triumph. Just stillness, like something that had been wound too tight had finally been allowed to relax. My phone started ringing that evening, Tyler first. I let it go to voicemail, then Amanda, twice, then Derek. I answered Derek. He said, "Mom, what happened?" I told him what I'd heard. All of it. I kept my voice level. I told him about the casserole dish, the unlocked door, the parking lot. I told him what Amanda had said about me needing to feel important, what she'd said about Derek's own wife agreeing with her. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I said, "I know." He asked what I was going to do. I told him I was going to take a trip. I had been thinking for 2 years about going to see the national parks out west, Zion, Bryce Canyon, the Grand Canyon's North Rim. I had a good car and no particular schedule. I thought I'd leave in about a week. He said, "Just like that?" I said, "Derek, I spent $61,000 to be told I was in the way. Yes, just like that." Tyler called 6 more times over the next 2 days. On the 3rd day, he sent a long text, pages really. It started with an apology, then moved into explanation, then into something that began to sound a little like justification. He said Amanda had been stressed. He said I had been a lot sometimes. He said he loved me but that I had to understand Amanda's perspective. I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the table and went to pack my suitcase. I left on a Thursday morning with 2 bags, my road atlas, I still like a physical map, a cooler in the back seat, and enough silence to hear myself think for the first time in months. I drove through the dark, Indiana and Missouri the first day and slept at a small inn in Kansas City that had a porch swing and a view of nothing in particular. I sat on that swing for an hour before bed and thought about nothing. which was remarkable because I hadn't been able to think about nothing for a very long time. I spent 2 weeks out west. I stood at the rim of Bryce Canyon at 7 in the morning, when the light turned the hoodoos the color of embers. I hiked the Narrows in Zion with my waterproof boots and a borrowed trekking pole from the gear shop at the trailhead. I ate breakfast alone at diners and read paperback novels and slept long and well and did not check my voicemail for the first 4 days. When I did finally listen to the messages, there were 7 from Tyler, 2 from Amanda, which surprised me, and 1 from my son's wife, Cheryl, who said only that she was thinking of me and that she loved me. Amanda's messages were not apologies. They were requests for clarification about the vendor balances. Her voice had the specific tone of someone accustomed to getting things resolved in her favor. She said she wasn't sure what miscommunication had led to the payment issues, and she wanted to discuss how to move forward. I did not call her back. I called Cheryl. We talked for an hour. She cried a little, which made me feel more normal than anything else had in weeks. She told me some things I hadn't known, that Amanda had made comments about me at family dinners before the engagement, that Cheryl herself had tried to raise it with Derek and been told he didn't want family drama. She said she was sorry she hadn't told me sooner. I said I understood. People protect the peace until the peace isn't worth protecting. I got back to Columbus on a Sunday evening. My garden had survived. My neighbor had watered the tomatoes like I'd asked. I made tea, sat on my back porch, and watched the yard go dark. Tyler came to my house 6 days later. He came alone. He sat at my kitchen table with his hands around a mug of coffee, and he looked younger than 29 in a way that hurt to see. He said he was sorry. Not the text message kind, the sitting across from you kind. He said he had known Amanda was pulling away from including me, and he had told himself it was fine. He said he had been a coward and he knew it. I asked him if he was still getting married. He said yes. He said Amanda's parents were helping cover what had fallen through. The wedding was scaled back. They'd moved from Whitethorn to a smaller venue, cut the guest list. He said it was going to be okay. I nodded. I told him I was glad. I meant it. He asked if I would come. I looked at him for a moment. I thought about Whitethorn Estate, the pond, the oak tree, Amanda's hand on my arm. I told him I needed more time to know the answer to that. He nodded, like someone accepting a ruling he'd been prepared for. He stood up to leave. At the door he turned and said, "Grandma, I know you were trying to love us. I know that's what it was." I said, "I know you know." He left. I stood at the window and watched his car pull away, then turned back to my kitchen where the evening light was coming in at an angle and the coffee was still warm. I'm not angry. That's the thing I keep checking, reaching in to see if the anger is there, the way you press a bruise to see if it still hurts. Mostly it doesn't. Mostly what I feel is a very clear sense of what I will and won't do with the rest of my life. I spent 61 years learning that time is the one thing that does not replenish. I spent $61,000 learning that generosity without honesty is just a longer way of being taken for granted. I'm still deciding about the wedding. But I went back to Zion in September, alone, which I've stopped apologizing for, and stood again at the mouth of the Narrows, where the canyon walls rise 1,000 feet on either side, and the cold water runs clear over the stones, and I thought, I earned every year it took me to get here. Every single one. Nobody gets to make me feel small for knowing that. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually means to help someone, not the feeling of helping. That part is easy, and honestly, it feels good. It feels like love made visible. You write the check, you show up at the venue, you sit across the table with the binder and the color swatches, and you think, this is what family does. This is what I built all those years for. But I've come to understand that there's a difference between generosity and surrender. And for a long time, I confused the two. When I offered Tyler and Amanda $75,000, I wasn't buying anything. I want to be clear about that, even now. I wasn't trying to purchase a seat at every table or run someone else's wedding. I was trying to love my grandson in the way I knew how, practically, concretely, with everything I had available to give. That's how I've always shown up in the world. I built a business from nothing. I raised a son on my own. When I care about something, I put my hands on it. What I didn't understand, what took me standing in that hallway holding a casserole dish to finally understand, is that not everyone experiences generosity as love. Some people experience it as leverage. Some people take a gift and immediately begin calculating how to get the rest of it while giving back as little as possible. That's not a moral failing I can fix in them. It's just a fact about who they are. Amanda didn't become a different person the moment she said what she said. She was already that person. I just hadn't been paying attention to the right things. I'd been watching her enthusiasm, her binder, her hand on my arm at Whitethorn Estate. I hadn't been watching what she did when she thought I wasn't there. That's the thing about character. It doesn't perform for an audience. It shows up in the Tuesday afternoon conversations and the changed appointments nobody bothered to mention, and the way someone talks about you when they think the hallway is empty. And Tyler, I've sat with that the longest. Because Tyler isn't a bad person. He's a young man who was afraid to lose something he wanted, and he made the calculation that staying quiet was the same as staying neutral. It isn't. Silence in the face of someone being diminished is always a choice. He'll understand that more fully someday. I hope it doesn't cost him the way it cost me. What I know now, what I keep coming back to, sitting on my back porch watching the yard, is that self-respect is not a luxury for when things are going well. It is the foundation. Everything else is built on top of it. The moment I set that casserole dish down and walked back out to my car, I wasn't giving up on my family. I was refusing to participate in my own erasure. Those are very different things. I spent $61,000 learning that. Some people would say that's a high price for a lesson. Maybe. But I stood at the rim of Bryce Canyon at 7 in the morning with the light on the hoodoos and 2 weeks of my own company, and I thought, I'm still here. I'm still exactly myself. Nobody took that from me. That's worth something. That's worth quite a lot.